Ontario Aboriginal Housing Services was born out of an urban Indigenous community decision to take explicit and direct control over urban Indigenous housing. That was largely prompted or coincided with the mainstream political machine to get the federal government out of housing. So from that decision, the urban Indigenous community at the time said, no, you know what? We need to take control over our own housing needs.
Social housing was about to be axed, too costly to be carried on, so they stopped funding in 1993. $1 million no longer available to keep the organization afloat. So the organization, one day they just shut the doors. Don and I moved downtown here. His mother-in-law owned a music store on Queen Street. It was an old dentist office. So he and I and one other administrative assistant, Sharon Busno, the three of us moved into that office, and we proceeded to try and go to the next step. And we thought, well, we needed to have a more eclectic board. And at that point, we renamed the organization Ontario Aboriginal Housing.
Off-reserve housing for low and moderate income, families was a serious priority. So we came together and formed a steering committee, and I was the Ottawa rep on the steering committee.
One particular challenge that has changed the trajectory of OHS has been this philosophy of for Indigenous by Indigenous. When you look back to the beginnings of OHS and the transfer of what was then called the Rural Native Housing Portfolio, that was very much the continuation of this idea that government shouldn't be the ones providing control over urban Indigenous housing. In fact, it should be the Indigenous community, the urban Indigenous community, that has control over urban Indigenous housing and the associated programs and services. That philosophy, that thought, has continued through the development of various programs and services at OHS, as well as formed the basis of our discussions with whether it be municipal, provincial, or federal governments.
OMA and OFIFC, like the off-reserve organizations, work together on some priority issues.
I was already the executive director of the Ontario Federation of Indigenous Friendship Centres and already had some experience by then about attempting to create some coalitions with urban Indigenous service providers. So we were able to do some things that were more creative than people had tried before. I think you had the perfect storm. You had political people and senior management coming from the three organizations in a coalition that had not existed in the same way ever before. Culturally, we have notions that sometimes we have to be patient. We were finally at the right space at the right time.
Now it's a small organization, and the province liked the work that was being done and the fact that we were an Indigenous organization. In '96, CMHC decided that they no longer wanted to be the senior partner, and they transferred all of the RNH units, rural and native housing units, to the province of Ontario. So they approached Don and asked him if he would be interested in taking over the administration for all 14 managers. So he created Ontario Aboriginal Housing Support Services Corporation. 2009, they decided they wanted to transfer the ownership to OHS. So now we're talking, okay, we're going to give you transfer the ownership of 1,532, I believe it was, rental units across the province. The total number of rental units never increased, not quite enough to make a go of it, and we're concerned that at some future date, the province will stop funding. We will no longer receive subsidy. Once the subsidy's gone, we will no longer be able to afford to run the program. So we've got to increase our portfolio. Along comes the feds in the province again saying, okay, well, we want to help you out. We're going to put some money into the game. So we created what's called the FEMA program, First Nation, Inuit, Métis, Urban and Rural. We were to administer that, so we went out to different organizations across the province that wanted to build houses. We would give them the funding to construct their units, and they would look after them. And there was still money that was left over was taken over by OHS. So now we were able to increase our portfolio.
We all cried when the very first house that went to, a woman who had been escaping violence, a single mom and her children. That was really what we all stood for. And coming together to make that FEMA program, to really be able to see that vision of not just continually supporting people, but being able to empower, to create a situation where, because of something we've done, that woman and those children are able to empower themselves, are able to really not just survive, but really thrive and fulfill their dreams and reach their potential. When we envisioned putting FEMA together, there was a huge ripple effect, because for every family who was essentially paying market rent, because as geared to income rent goes up, being able to move them into home ownership and then freeing up some of those spaces for others who really need that geared to income. So it wasn't for every home owner that was able to get a home, it wasn't just that family that was impacted. It was the family that was then able to get that home, get in a home into affordable housing, get into geared to income housing. So it rippled down the line to create housing opportunities for many, many families with each family that went into home ownership.
We do good work. So I said, that's got to be our motto. We do good work, and the province loved that idea. So they came knocking on our door every time there was an opportunity to expand the program in Ontario. We were the face of Indigenous housing in the province of Ontario.
We have those grassroots connections and relationships, and we're much better positioned to be able to work really collaboratively across the whole province with Indigenous communities in order to be able to make sure that our families have safe and affordable housing. And we positioned it as a real win-win situation, that this would be great for the government because they were going to be able to, they wouldn't have this headache of having to deliver these things, because on the grassroots level, delivering housing is incredibly complex. It can be incredibly emotional. I mean, this is such a huge need for families. So we made the argument that this was going to benefit the province, that this was going to benefit Indigenous community, and this was going to be a win-win for everybody. So when I think about my inspiration, especially when people realize that, these were volunteers, that all of the people who came forward to be on our board and worked tirelessly to get this housing for our communities, our inspiration week after week, month after month, year after year, government meeting after government meeting, was really our families. Thinking about those women and children, we really are making a huge difference, not just in that one family, but the same way we know that having that stability of housing for one family, the cousins who come over, the niece or nephew who is going to school and needs some place to stay, like this has a ripple effect through entire communities when you get safe and affordable housing for our people.
There's a lot of great projects that we've done to create better facilities or better homes or fixed homes for people, healthy homes, because it's amazing what we could do, as a smaller organization with supportive housing in Ontario. I think we've done a great job.
Unfortunately, with Don's passing, we realized just what a big part of the heart of OAHS that he was. Sometimes the vision of one person can have a huge impact, because he did so much. His vision, his knowledge of financing, his knowledge of the housing industry, his knowledge of the construction industry. It took us multiple people to replace that kind of knowledge and skill and diplomacy. I went with Don to Vancouver, to all over the place, presenting, negotiating, and he had such an incredible way with people that he could convince anybody to support us, and he knew everybody everywhere we went. But I think really just seeing somebody like that who had the vision, and so much of what we did was part of Don's vision. And then if you put Sylvia and Don together, like there was nobody that could stop us.
We did have Justin waiting in the wings, and fortunately, Don had done a good job of information transfer, and there had been. And there was some stability at the office, so that there were people who were there for long periods of time and kind of knew their job, and I think it helped.
We had the capability to move somebody into that role and responsibility, and we brought Justin in as our new director. And I think it's worked out very well.
The most impactful lesson before stepping into the role of CEO was probably the last words that our founding executive director, Don McBain, said to me. When I left his house and saw him for the last time, the very last words that he said to me were come together. And I believe he meant that in multiple senses of the phrase, in multiple depths of the phrase. And that is one lesson that I carry with me and hold dear to my heart.
His legacy is the foundation of OHAS, and he mentored and did succession planning with the right person. And so seeing Justin now grow into a great leader, a leader who's being courageous but humble, and seeing him be able to take the agency to another level, has been really great to see. And it's an honor to be able to work with Justin and the whole team.
Culture is the center of what we do. It needs to be the center of what we do. When a person is grounded in knowing who they are and where they've come from, that's part of it. The other part of it is that, and while there are many different Indigenous cultures, those Indigenous values are something that we saw as being absent from other housing models. Those Indigenous values, 7 grandfather teachings, are the foundation of how we work at Ontario Aboriginal Housing Services.
By Indigenous people, for Indigenous people, and I think that is absolutely critical when we're providing housing, because we understand what culturally appropriate housing means. We understand the importance of relationship. We understand how to make things welcome and safe for our Indigenous, for our families, our community members.
We brought the culture to people as opposed to people trying to find it and go somewhere. And those kinds of things have teaching us for us: kindness, honesty, sharing, and strength.
We have different modes of housing because one approach to housing hasn't worked in Canada very well. And that's why we're in the homelessness and housing crisis that we're in today. People are at different points in their life throughout their entire life journey. And it would be wise if we were able to provide housing solutions that met the person where they are. If we want to be that housing provider that really helps people, that really supports people, then we've got to be responsive to what their needs are. We need to be able to provide different solutions, meet individuals' needs at every point of their life journey. Fortunately, unfortunately, the pandemic shed a spotlight on the homelessness crisis that we're in. It suddenly was impossible to not see. Today, Indigenous people in Northern Ontario make up anywhere from 2/3 to 90+% of the homeless population. In Southern Ontario, Indigenous people make up anywhere from 20 to 30% of the homeless population. There were a number of resources that were increased for the homelessness crisis during the pandemic. And again, that's largely because the rest of society started to see what we've seen for decades.
I think Ontario Aboriginal Housing has a huge role to play because we work across the continuum of housing.
Community came up with really very innovative programs. And so the home ownership program actually came from community. And so I think that's, why the program is so successful and why OHAS is so successful is because we listen to community of what they want, because they identify the solutions to the issue. We all know the issues out there. We as Indigenous people know there's more issues than there is solutions, the way it feels anyway, except for when you begin based on from what community wants to do and you start there, you can see movement happening so fast. And that's exactly what you can see with OHAS over the years. The advocacy of going from, managing a couple of small portfolios to where we've grown to today, and only can imagine where OHAS is going to go in the future. I think the potential is huge as long as OHAS continues to do the work based on principles of remembering who we are as Indigenous people and making sure that we're always listening to community and that we always begin where community is at and that we never lose our ways of knowing and being as Indigenous people. That is critical to our success.
And it takes an organization that has the skill set and the history and the knowledge that Aboriginal Housing does to work and educate the folks who can be brought to the table to help make that change.
I think it's important to remain very, very humble about that though. Today we serve over 12,000 people every day. the road ahead of us is much longer than the road behind us. We've got an enormous amount of work to do. We're not going to do all of that work in our lifetime. It's important to be realistic about this. But we can build, pun intended, a strong foundation for the urban Indigenous community to keep building on the idea that we have the ability to ensure that every person has a safe, affordable place to live. Our director member organizations, our team at OHS has demonstrated that there's hope for the housing and homelessness crisis that we're in. As we share that message, as people see the change in people's lives, that people's lives can improve, not just improve, but improve dramatically when somebody has a safe, appropriate place to live, lives change. Who wouldn't want to be part of making positive change in people's lives? Every day we face challenges at Ontario Aboriginal Housing Services. And I think if we keep in mind that the people that are on our wait list, the people that are not on our wait list that need housing, they're the ones that face real challenges every day.
So we're doing multi-generation, even this conversation you and I are having. And that's part of our path to the future, that we don't have to be parceled out like mainstream does it. There's room for us all in the circle. There's not housing for all of us yet, but that's what we share.
Obviously, we want to develop together and seeing the goal for affordable housing for our urban Indigenous population. I only hope with the spirit of cooperation that OHAS has, we can utilize our past successes and continue to maximize housing growth for our citizens. That's what I hope.
We're not supposed to be proud, but when I look back on my career and when I officially retired, and there was an event for me at housing, I thought, yeah, gee, I was helpful in this process.
OHAS has the capacity, and OHAS is the answer. I'd just like to give a message out to everybody who works within OHAS, all the staff, all the volunteers. I just really wanted to say Chi Miigwech, Matna Merci, Niawengo, for choosing OHAS as part of your story and walking this journey with us. And I want to thank every person who works with us for the work that you do every day, because you're part of the story and you're part of the impact. So for that, I just want to say Chi Miigwech.
The strongest power in creation is a steady drip of water. It's not the flood. It's not the big iceberg. It can change the face of the landscape of the world, that steady drip. And that's what we should be. I mean, improve the quality of life for our people. And so while we may choose to work in a little tiny square of what that life looks like, we have to make sure that the moccasin tracks that we're leaving are such that people can see there are all kinds of branches so we all find the peace.